It's Michelle from Tape and Twine and Creative Cottage Studio, and I wanted to do part 2 of my image transfer to polymer clay, and this time I want to use a digital kit. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with digital kits, and I'm speaking mostly to my polymer clay people, there are artists who have digital downloads that you can purchase, and you can download already creative little pieces of art that then you can use for your own projects. I'm using an artist named Tracie Fox. She has an Etsy shop named Love Junk Journals, and she does all sorts of beautiful kits using vintage pictures, and she does mixed media collage, etc. And she does it for junk journals, which is something that I'm also work with. But I'd like to use those kits and see if we can make some really interesting book plates with them. We've made these chunky wall hangings, but now I would like to make something that I can use on the front of a book. So I would like to make a book plate. So in that particular case, it needs to be very thin because I'm going to be gluing it to a book front, and I don't want to take up too much room. And I thought these little embellishments that she made look like perfect little book plates. And they're from her basic entomology mini embellishment kit. So basically what you would want to do for this is you would want to pick one and cut it out. I think I'm going to use the ladybug because I'd like to see how the red comes out. Okay, so it's rather small, a little bit bigger than a postage stamp. It's going to be our first one. And then these right here are also a really nice size for a book journal, but I blew them up a bit to a much bigger size and cut a few out. I like the B, so we're going to also use the B. And I'm going to see, that kind of fits really nice too. Now, where on our other project we were using a hole to make our hanger. This is a book plate, so I won't need a hole. Now, this would look great for a hanging project too. So these images can also be used for hanging projects. I just want to make a book plate for this particular project. So I'm going to take my polymer clay, and what's going to be different about this is I'm going to roll it very thin. Now, I don't want to roll it so thin that it's going to be cracking and doesn't have enough stability, but it is going to be glued to a book front. So it is not going to be like, it's not going to need to have as much girth as the other one to make it stable. So this is quite thin. I would say it's probably about a 1/16. We still want to make sure those bubbles are out. So we want to do something called patting the clay, which is really working those air bubbles out. And if you can't get them out, you're going to have to pierce them with a needle tool, just like I did in the first part of the video. And I'm peeling it up and down just so that it's not sticking yet. Okay, so now I'm going to put it down here. And what I think I'd like to do is I'm going to start with this one first. So it's the same process that we did before of laying down a thin layer of water and then putting your transfer on it and then wetting and tapping. So while I'm wetting and tapping, for those of you who are new to paper craft, I will tell you that there are two things that I primarily specialize in, and that is polymer clay and making junk journals. Junk journals are a collection of papers that are bound together to make a beautiful journal or scrapbook. And they used to be made from literally junk. That's why they call them junk journals, like, you know, recite just what you had around the house. And now they're made with all sorts of beautiful papers. But I personally like to use vintage papers. And for those of you who are new to polymer, polymer clay is such a versatile product. It's inexpensive. You don't need special tools. You can bake it in a toaster oven or in your conventional oven. It is safe and non-toxic. And you can make embellishments for your books. Right here, we're going to be working on book plates. It's also great for all sorts of different things. You could make decorative book covers. Now, it's not strong as in like it could crash into things and not break. It's kind of like resin. But with chipboard behind it and the right adhesive, I believe that there would be enough strength. So I'm going to actually leave this on for a minute. Make sure all of this transfer. Now this is new. I haven't used a transfer. I haven't used a digital kit before. And many digital kits, as you know, have a lot of subtleties in them because they're layered art. So they have, you know, the bee, which was in this one, and then it's layered on a colored background. Sometimes there's some faint writing. In this case, there's some other textures. It'll be interesting to see how sensitive the clay is to that. So I'm going to dust off this. Now I'm going to cut out a circle. And I believe that this size is the closest I'm going to get. It's going to cut off a little, well, this one might be a little bit better. That one, yeah, I think I'm going to do that one because I want to get all of the image. Okay, we're going to peel that off. And I'm just going to pull apart some of this clay because I don't need a lot for the smaller one. Put that down there. And now I'm going to do this little image. Now, if you have any words, now if I had, let's say, use these words, you cannot transfer words like that to a paper because they will end up being backwards when you transfer them. So you'd have to print it out as what's called a mirror image. And a mirror image will print the words backwards on the page so that when you print, they'll print out backwards, but then when you flip it over and do the transfer, it will be correct. But just know that if you use words, they have to be backwards. So it'll be interesting to see how this little book plate comes out. Now I don't have a square that's going to be the right size, but what I can do is use this. Oh no, that one's too, I think they're all going to be too big. So I'm just going to take a blade. I'll actually wait, I think, until I pull the paper off. That'll be a little bit easier that way. Okay, so let's start with this one first and let's peel off and see how this comes out. Now the interesting thing is, there are some words written in the background, but they're so very faint. But they seem a little bit darker on this, which is just really interesting to me that that actually was very sensitive to that background art. And that paper really stuck, so I am having to really rub gently. Now I see the words actually more in the transfer than I do in the paper, which is really interesting.
Hi.
Okay, I'm just going to gently try to dust that paper off. And that came out really, really nice. Okay, so now I'm going to take off the smaller one. And I'm going to trim the clay with an X-Acto knife because I do not have the correct size cutter. That really came out great, the graphics. So I'm going to now just smooth out the edges and clean up the paper around, and then we'll pop these in the oven. You can talk, Dylan. Okay, I've cleaned this up now, and I noticed this got a little distorted, so I'm just using a flat edge to really make sure that this is nice and square. And I'm going to come around here and just smooth this out. These are very thin, so I'm not going to try to take them off. I'm going to actually bake this right on. And this should be done in 15 minutes as well. Now, do you see this little white area around here? I'm going to trim a little of that off, just because it's a little bit big on one side. I really like that. The last little bit I wanted to try was, these are embellishment pages. So they're little elements that Tracie has made for us to use. But this, and I'm speaking of course to my clay people because my journal people know, this is an actual journal page. So what she's done is she's made a collage with different elements that look like an old page that you can print out and work in your journal. I happen to like these two little pieces here. So I blew them up, much bigger than what they are. And I'm going to also transfer those and see how these work as well as potential book plates. So let's do that real quick as well. Now this particular image has a dragonfly and it's on graph paper. And I am not sure whether or not it's going to be sensitive enough to pick up that graph paper. It also has a vintage looking piece of tape so it looks as if it's taped, the image of the dragonfly is taped onto the graph paper. I'm just very curious to see how sensitive the polymer clay will be to these very subtle parts of the collage. And I'm curious to see how the colors will come out. I see that the colors usually deepen when it's baked, so it's possible that something very, very subtle could show up really nicely on a transfer. I guess we will find out. I also want to point out that this word, we couldn't really read it before, but it's definitely backwards now. So if I had put it in mirror, it would be the right direction, but it doesn't really bother me because sort of that look isn't meant to be read. It's just supposed to look like vintage handwriting, and I'm okay with it. But I will point it out because as the front of a book plate, it might be something that you want to have, especially if it is legible and you can read the word. Again, you can't really read the words behind the B either. So it's not a problem that it's, you know, technically backwards. I just would like to know if I can use these elements. I'm not somebody as a junk journaler who uses a ton of kits, but this would be a way that I would love to use kits because you can't do this with a vintage book page. You could scan the vintage book page into a program and then print it out, but at that point I'm using paper anyway, so why not use a beautiful piece of art that Tracie made or another artist has made. Okay. So now I'm actually going to cut this after because I did not get all the tape, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to. It doesn't show up as much as I had hoped. It could be because maybe I didn't tap it enough, but we will find out. I'm just going to give it a minute to rest on there. Let's get this top. Well, I guess not. All right, it did kind of come out, I guess. Ooh, that blue came out beautiful. So on my printer sheet, I didn't feel like the blue was as vibrant. For some reason, in this process, I feel like the colors do get a little bit more vibrant. Or maybe closer to the vibrancy that I see on the screen, but maybe that the printer doesn't necessarily always get. Now I'm going to trim this. Do I want to have... Sorry, I hit you. I'm going to use this as the starting point, and then I'll probably have to trim some more. Now, if I really would have liked to have that corner there, but I didn't have enough clay in that corner. So I'm going to have to cut in general, though, I'm really pleased with that. I can see some of the graph paper, but I don't really know that it's noticeable. So I'm gonna actually cut this so it looks more like a book plate. And again, this is just an experiment, so I will definitely, if this works, work on making more permanent looking book plates, but this is pretty good. I might actually round the corners a little bit. Oops, I did not go straight there. Okay, so here are our 4 book plates of different thicknesses, and we're going to see how this comes out. So I'm going to throw these in the oven. Okay, so our book plates are out of the oven, and they're very thin, so it probably would be smart to let them cool on their own, but I'm not very smart all the time, and I want to put them in the ice water bath. So I'm going to do that one first. I'm certain if I showed you on the side how flexible these were, they would pop in half, so I certainly don't want to do that. I'm taking a blade made for polymer clay, but you could use anything that you have that's like a spatula. I'm going to put those in. Let's see how stiff they get. I'm going to do the rubbing of the front while they're soaking just to get the residue of any paper off. And you can kind of see there definitely is still a little bit of paper, but they're hardening up nice, and they're almost like a thin plastic. I think these are going to look great on covers of books. Look at the detail on that. Do you see that? That came out really great. And this one, you really see the background writing. Okay, so these are cool. I'm going to go dry them off in a paper towel. I'll be right back. I am so thrilled with how responsive the clay was to the digitals. In fact, I think it got more than I was even expecting it to get. I mean, if you look at how small this dragonfly was on the page, blowing it up, I did not have the expectation it would come out that good. Now in the first part, you saw that I added some paint and embellishment, trying to embellish it before I varnished. These are just book plates, and I think they're beautiful as they are. So the only thing I want to add to them is some gilding wax to age it a little bit and to finish the edges, and then I'll varnish it. So around here where we have, where we have the white, I'm definitely going to come in with the gilding wax. And I'm actually not even going to worry about how neat I am on the artwork, because part of what journaling is making everything kind of look old and a little bit grungy. And I can buff some of this out. So where I hit the artwork, I'll kind of buff it in. I'm going to add a little copper to it. Here's the copper. Get it wet. That's darker, so that's actually going to blend nice with that edge. Kind of finishes that edge really nicely. And it has a little bit, I'm going to come in and make it uneven so that it has a little bit more interest in it. I'll let that dry. On this one, I think I'm also going to come in with the edge. You know, it's sort of like when we ink the outside of our paper. It kind of adds that vintage and worn look to it. Now this guy, I'm going to come in a little bit with the copper. Come over the edge just a little bit. I want to kind of dirty it up just a little bit. I want to grunge it up and make it look a little aged, as we usually do. And then I think I'm going to come in with the gold and do a little bit of shading on it. Since it is a book plate, I want it to sort of look like a book plate. And you can come in and rub off if you feel like you don't want it completely there. You can take a little bit of that alcohol that we used earlier, and that will help clean off any gilding wax that you don't like where it is. So if I don't want any there on the dragonfly, I can clean that up. You see that? My light's starting to go a little bit because it's getting late in the day. Add a little bit more gold there. And on this guy, I'm going to clean up a little bit of the gilding wax. Okay. I don't want to lose all the details that Tracie put in over here on the edge. Okay, so now, oh, I got one more guy. Let's go in with gold first. And this gilding wax is very versatile. If you don't have gilding wax and you don't want to spend the money on it, when the clay is still raw, you can use an expensive eyeshadow, you know, like from the dollar store. You could get it in golds and coppers. It has to be rubbed in though when it's raw clay before you bake it, so that the clay will grab it. I kind of just like the gold on it, but I'm just going to add a little copper just for a little bit of an edge. Oh, I really like that. I hope you like it, Tracie. I hope you watch this. Be curious to see what you think of what I did with your kit. Okay. So now I'm going to take a little bit of the varnish, the Duraclear, which is right here. I'm just going to put a little on my tile. I can scrape it off after. You don't need a lot. And I'm going to do this up close to the camera so you can see how it brings out the details. And with the light from above, it's a little bit hard. There's a lot of reflection and shine. But I think you get the idea. It really finishes the piece, really brings out a lot of the colors, and it protects it. It makes it a little bit harder. You just need a thin coat. And I will photograph these in natural light without a light above me to show you really what they'll look like on a book, because I think they're going to work great. Look how cute that little guy is. And there are our 4 book plates made from a digital kit in a little bit of polymer clay.